A war of rhetoric has begun between Iran and the United States. Donald Trump's Project Freedom in the Strait of Hormuz has turned up the heat in and around the narrow waterway. The American president has described it as a mini war, while Iran says that it has not even started yet. The U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth addressed a press conference today and gave the latest updates on Project Freedom. He said the Strait of Hormuz is completely open and that the U.S. commercial vessels, along with destroyers, have already passed through the waterway unharmed.
2 U.S. commercial ships, along with American destroyers, have already safely transited the strait, showing the lane is clear. We know the Iranians are embarrassed by this fact. They said they control the strait. They do not.
Remember, this comes after the United States claimed to have targeted 6 small Iranian boats and intercepted cruise missiles and drones. However, as per the Iranian media, the IRGC has imposed a new control zone in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian line of control reportedly rests between Mount Mubarak in Iran, extending to the south of Fujairah in the UAE. This is how the battle lines are currently drawn around the Strait of Hormuz. The United States claims control over the waterway's exit, while Iran claims control over the entry from the Persian Gulf. This leaves commercial vessels guessing the safest way out of the contested waters. Donald Trump has resumed his rhetoric of warnings. Remember, he has said that Iran will be blown off the face of the earth if it attacks American ships. Meanwhile, when Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai was responding to a question about making a compromise with the U.S., he said Iran is also a superpower. Now, the battle of rhetoric comes at a time when both sides have refused to accept peace deals proposed by the other. Warning shots have now been fired, but will they push both sides toward a deal, or will the war now resume? That's the big question. All right, I'm joined by Douglas McGregor, former senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense and a Gulf War combat veteran. He's joining us live on the broadcast from Washington, D.C. Mr. McGregor, thanks very much for joining us on WION. Can I start by asking you what you think of Project Freedom? Is it really as free as Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth would want the world to believe? Is it free of missile attacks, of drone attacks, and the underwater mines that IRGC Navy has laid out?
No. In fact, I can't confirm any of the claims that have been made this morning by the Secretary of War. I think we're exaggerating our importance in this matter. Last week, the president was trying to make up his mind about what he wanted to do, and I think this is a short-term solution before he resumes the start of the war. And I don't see any evidence that this is having the impact that he says it is. In fact, U.S. Central Command has issued guidance to any tanker who wants to try and come through the strait to try and hug the Omani coast. And of course, there's very little enthusiasm for that among the tankers because you could easily run aground. So I'm not quite sure what they're referring to. What we know is that, yes, they attacked some boats in the strait, but these were civilian vessels. They had nothing to do with the IRGC.
You know, which is what I was coming to next, Mr. McGregor, that there has been an escalation as far as civilian infrastructure is concerned. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself has condemned the attack on the civilian infrastructure in the UAE, as well as the injuries that have taken place with 3 Indian nationals being injured. Do you see this now as a major escalation which will intensify and deepen further?
I anticipate that, yes, this will escalate. And keep in mind that the United Arab Emirates has been perhaps one of the strongest supporters of Israeli interest and has made itself a permanent enemy of Iran. So it's not surprising that the Iranians took these steps, and I would expect to see more destruction in the future. The problem for the United Arab Emirates that has now left OPEC in order, I think, to secure funding from the United States is that the United States Armed Forces cannot protect the United Arab Emirates, or for that matter, anybody on the west coast of the Persian Gulf. And that's the problem. We just can't stop the Iranian attacks.
Multiple American experts and veterans like yourselves, Douglas McGregor, they say that, look, it's Iran which is escalating this entire conflict by attacking civilian infrastructure, and America is only protecting it. Do you buy that? Because the counter argument to that is it's the United States and Israel that started this war, and Iran is just retaliating now.
Oh, absolutely. The United States and Israel did begin this war. It was ultimately started first by Israel, and then we were drawn into it by the Israeli government. And President Trump began by telling everyone that he was going to end Iranian civilization, ultimately destroy the state, its population, everything. And he's vacillated between these outrageous statements and confusing actions. And there's been no real diplomacy. When we sent people to meet with the Iranians, the only thing they did was represent Mr. Netanyahu's demands. And naturally, Iran will not accept those demands. So at this point, there is no diplomacy. I don't really see any viable strategy. There is only an emphasis on the use of military power to punish and destroy Iran. It's not going to work. And the Iranians view this, for obvious reasons, as an existential war. They are going to use everything they have to protect themselves and destroy their enemies.
You talked about strategy, Mr. McGregor, and a lot of people say that, look, Donald Trump's recent terminology that he's used for this conflict has been mini war, and he's been using such terms for the past several weeks into this conflict. Do you see this as a strategy, or do you see this as, just random terms that are being used to escalate United States as well as Donald Trump to a higher pedestal in this conflict, considering the fact that US itself has faced losses?
I think President Trump wants to minimize the war in the view of the American people. He wants to convince Americans that this is not a major war and that it's under control and he's managing it effectively. I think that's what he wants to do. But the truth is, our efforts to defeat Iran, to regain control or to take control of the Strait of Hormuz away from Iran have failed. And it's humiliating for President Trump, who promised, as I said earlier, to utterly destroy Iran. Iran is not destroyed. Iran is quite capable of striking back, even though it spends roughly 1% of the money that we do on national defense. It's turned out to have become very, very powerful in its exploitation of overhead surveillance and its strike weapons, and we don't seem to be able to overcome that. So I think everything that President Trump is doing and saying is trying to disguise the humiliation and the defeat to this point, and to create the illusion in America that this is somehow another a minor event that's under control. But we all know that this has created a global crisis. It has disrupted the energy supply system. It's now destroying the supply system. There's been an 84% increase in crude oil price all over the world. This is nothing short of a major disaster. He's just trying to make it seem smaller than it is.
It's interesting you say that, because you're somebody who's also served in the first Trump administration back in 2020. So you would understand, how he works, although it's, he's very unpredictable and it's hard to say what move he will make next. But what do you think could be his next path or direction that he takes in this conflict? He's been undermining it, but the next few weeks and months, what do you expect?
Well, I think the next thing we should expect is a massive air and missile assault launched by all the forces that we have in the region right now against Iran. The force that is there today is actually larger and more powerful than what was there during the first phase of this conflict. So that's what I expect. There is no alternative for President Trump. The only viable alternative for him is to essentially announce that this has been a failure. He doesn't want to do that. To announce that on humanitarian grounds, this war needs to end because it's harming the entire world and the global economy. But he won't do that. he's not going to disengage unless he can find a way to create the illusion that he is victorious. I don't see how he does that. I think things are going to get much worse from here.
I also want to quickly shift our focus to the kind of domestic pressure Donald Trump is facing. You know, there have been, of course, Democrats that have been upping the ante against Donald Trump as far as this war is concerned. But, as far as that deadline was concerned, there was no substantial movement or action that was taken by the Democrats. Why do you think that has happened?
Well, the Israel lobby and its billionaire agents in the United States effectively own both Congress and the White House. And as a result, there's no serious resistance to this war against Iran. This is something the Israelis have been planning on and trying to build toward for 30 years. They've now gotten what they wanted. They have control of the United States armed forces in a war against Iran. And they're not going to give it up, and they're not going to allow any of the people that are effectively on their payroll to back out. Now, you're right, the situation inside the United States is deteriorating, but it is not deteriorating as quickly here as it is in Europe and parts of Asia. But it will. We will catch up with the rest of the world in terms of prices and inflation, shortages. Those things are going to hit very hard, but they haven't really struck yet. But I think President Trump knows that, which is why he's going to be forced to escalate and make a final attempt to try and destroy the Iranian state. I don't think it's going to work.
But isn't it very convenient for the Trump administration to say that, look, we were pulled into this conflict because of Israel? That's like saying we witnessed somebody taking a bribe, but we didn't report it. It's almost like saying that you're part of it, you're attacking it, which means that you took a conscious decision to be part of it.
Well, that's true. And right now, in the view of the American public, President Trump and the people in Washington increasingly look like willing puppets of Greater Israel, that we have signed on to make the Greater Israel Project work, that we have committed to destroy all of Israel's enemies in the region, to fight against anyone who opposes Israel. This has just about nothing to do with American national interest, and that's beginning to sink in. But nothing will change until the pain here inside American society becomes far, far worse than it is today.
All right, let's wait and watch how this moves forward and whether there is an easy way out of this conflict for the United States of America and Donald Trump, especially ahead of the midterm elections that are coming up in November. I leave it there. Douglas McGregor, thank you very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Sure, thank you.